Hello everyone, this is Osiris Frost. In today's episode, I'm going to go over some recent issues with the Gravlev system and discuss upcoming changes that will improve mechanics for hoverbikes in Star Citizen. But before I jump in, the Hercules Starlifter sale went public this past week. I'll link to my video series on that ship if you haven't checked it out yet. There's also a short story contest currently ongoing over on Spectrum, where CIG will give away a Hercules to the winner. The contest runs now through the 23rd of May, and I'll link to that post with all of the particulars down below if you're interested in participating. On to Gravlev. For those of you who don't know, Gravlev is the system that makes hoverbikes hover. As hoverbikes have only been a thing in games since 3.0, Gravlev represents a newer set of mechanics for Star Citizen. Gravlev mechanics are closely related to the broader Intelligent Flight Control System, or IFCS, which controls all flyable ships in Star Citizen. IFCS is really deserving of its own video, as it's a fairly expansive topic in and of itself, and as I've alluded to in past videos, I have some particular thoughts on how it should be adjusted as development proceeds. So, sticking to Gravlev for today, there are currently two space bikes already in game, the Dragonfly and the Nox. Getting them into a good, flyable state is a major focus of the current development push. In its current iteration, space bikes handle very poorly. At the best of times, they feel too floaty, and more often they move in unpredictable ways. Gravlev has been a current topic of note within the community, as recently John Pritchett has been front and center in addressing the shortcomings of that system directly to backers. John is the senior physics engineer for Star Citizen. Basically, he's tasked with implementing the physics system into the game and ensuring that everything behaves as it should with regards to flight mechanics and so forth. Back at the end of April, he took to Spectrum to make a pretty lengthy post addressing player concerns. He acknowledged that version 1 shipped in a broken state. As Spectrum is on the internet, this naturally led to a situation where keyboard physicists started coming out of the woodwork to criticize the system, the game overall, and John Pritchett himself. He was also a guest on this past week's Calling All Devs, in which Jared Huckabee dedicated half the episode to talking with him about all things Gravlev. Let's start with the Spectrum post. As it's a little lengthy, I'll just touch upon some highlights, but the post will be linked down below in the show notes if you'd like to give it an upvote. The post was sort of him giving us a behind-the-curtain look at how the system is developing and addressing backer concerns. He opened by saying that there are fixes being worked on, but that they might not make it into game until 3.2 at the end of June. This is one of those things CIG talk about not being on the roadmap but still being actively worked on. Since the post first appeared, there have been a number of PTU builds which featured improvements to the Gravlev system, so there is a possibility that things might improve before 3.2, but don't count on that. He continues by saying that his intent for the final iteration is something closer to a collision-driven system that still retains the dynamic elements. In other games that have apparently hovering vehicles, it is common for the developers of those games to use what's known as an invisible wheel, such that the vehicle appears to be floating but is in fact in direct contact with the ground. John elected to eschew this system and instead develop an approach which modulated thruster output to actively repel the ground from the bike, or vice versa. I don't know, I'm not a physicist, but on paper his system would provide a more authentic hoverbike experience. It would incorporate a degree of player skill and thoughtfulness with respect to negotiating terrain. Too much of a drop or too sharp of a climb in elevation beneath the bike and you would bottom out. In other games, there's often a feeling of impunity from crashing into the ground, but here you'd actually have to drive your hoverbike like a rational actor. John explicitly states that the system is not meant to save you from reckless driving. I agree with this approach. CIG have always touted Star Citizen as the best damn space sim ever, so doing it the normal way because it's expedient or because that's how everyone else does it wouldn't be in keeping with that claim. So that was his post in a nutshell. Like I said, there's a lot more detail there if you care to read it. And that brings us to the Calling All Devs interview. The interview was a follow-up on that post. John confirmed that he's still targeting 3.2 and went into a little more detail about some areas. For starters, he said that when 3.0 came out, it introduced some big changes to the game engine itself, which had a knock-on effect on the Gravlev system that he developed. He had it working well by itself, but in the context of the new game engine, there were new problems that needed addressing. These were not quick fixes, and that's why we still, several months later, don't have a properly functioning Gravlev system. Now, this is nothing unusual in game development, but essentially that's why this thing has been a problem since its introduction. He went on to reiterate that his intention is for the system not to be a specific hoverbike behavior. For example, he doesn't want to just hard code that the Nox floats half a meter off the ground. Instead, he wants the Nox's systems to respond dynamically to their environment and always attempt to stay half a meter off the ground, but to naturally have reaction time and limitation based on thrust capability to where it affects how quickly and forcefully they can work in a given situation. He mentioned that drag and gravity will have tangible effects on hover dynamics. One specific example he gave was that if you banked into a turn, you'd be able to feel much more stopping power than if you just sat upright and turned. You would therefore be able to achieve a much tighter turn radius by doing so. In summary, he's implementing a general system that then other developers can apply to different vehicles so that they can tune each one to meet their specific needs. This is good. It's always appreciated when CIG staff communicate with the community. Most of us understand that this is a game in active development, still in its alpha phase, and we're willing to bear with the growing pains, provided CIG can just be upfront and communicate about where we're headed. So I'll link to the Calling All Devs video below, along with John's Spectrum post if you'd like to check those out. I am excited to hear about John's direction for Gravlev. I haven't jumped onto the PTU since 3.1 came out, but like I alluded to earlier, word on the street is that this feature is behaving much better on the current PTU build, so I think it's reasonable to expect better bike behavior in the near future. I would like to do a follow-up video on this once those changes are live, maybe with some before and after footage. But until next time, this has been Osiris Frost. That's all for today's show. Thanks for watching. If you're new to Star Citizen, or you know someone who's thinking of playing, you or they can earn 5,000 UEC on your account by registering with my referral code, which you can find in the show notes down below. If you have any questions, feedback, or episode suggestions, go ahead and leave them in the comments. And if you haven't already, please be sure to like and subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.